It is so good to see you guys. I'm going to give out a couple of gold stars before I get started today. One is, I get invited to speak other places occasionally. That's a little bit hot, Jay. Can you turn that down? And sometimes, you come back and you think, boy, our worship band's really good. You know what I mean? And Jamie Reagan, I was thinking about him. So I've been here a long time, and he's been here almost as long as I have, and that's really unusual to have two guys stay that long. And so if you see Jamie, I don't know if he's in here, he may have stepped out for a minute, but if you see him, just thank him for what he's doing, he continues to do. And then I saw my man Daniel Markham serving communion, and Laura up there, and she's embarrassed already, but that's okay. Got home at 1:45 last night, and rolled in from out of town to the 9 o'clock service. He doesn't realize it's the same thing at 11. But Daniel, gold star for you, man. And Laura, if you want to go to sleep, don't worry about it. All right, so have you ever been asked a question that you immediately knew the answer to? And maybe it's a question that you'd been asked before, or maybe it was just one of those questions that everybody instinctively knows the answer to. Like there's some questions, as soon as you hear them, you know the answer because everybody knows the answer. Sometimes with my little boys at home, I get asked questions like that. They'll say, Daddy, is fire hot? And you say, yeah, you don't have to think about that. Is ice cold? Yeah, like there's just certain things you don't have to explore all the answers. You just know. Another one of those questions, and maybe you've asked this one before, is there any way to slow time down? And the answer is no. Everybody sort of knows that. This morning, we're going to explore the question that was asked by the smartest man who ever lived. His name is Jesus. It's found in Matthew chapter 6. That's where we're going to land if you want to turn there in your Bible or on your phone. And we're going to put the question on the screen because I think it's an interesting question. Here's what he said. Can any one of you, by worrying, add a single hour to your life? Now, instinctively, you know the answer to that is no. You know that living in a perpetual state of anxiety does nothing to extend your life. In fact, it has the opposite effect. If there's anything that will take years off your life, it's living in this perpetual state of anxiety. I want you to listen to these words from a recent study that was conducted at Yale. It said, stress undeniably makes one's life clock tick faster. It increases the risk of heart disease, addiction, mood disorders, and post-traumatic stress disorder. It can influence metabolism, accelerating obesity-related disorders such as diabetes. It also saps our ability to regulate emotions and to think clearly. These results support the popular notion that stress in the form of anxiety makes us age faster. Now, here's what I know is true. You didn't need somebody from Yale to tell you that. Like you already have felt the effects of that in your own life. Some of you are sitting there right now, you're wondering, how many years have I already taken off my life because of my worry and stress? And if you're a person who struggles with this, I want you to know that you're in good company. One writer I read this week said, this is the pandemic that everybody's experiencing, but nobody's talking about. So I thought since we're here, and since everybody's experiencing this, at least at some level, we should spend some time talking about it. So last weekend, we launched this series we're calling Anxious for Nothing, in which we're exploring what the Bible says about overcoming anxiety and living in the peace that Jesus came to offer. And as we jump back in this morning, I want to go back to the definition that we used last week of anxiety. This comes from the American Psychological Association. It says anxiety is an emotion characterized by apprehension and somatic symptoms of tension in which an individual anticipates impending danger, catastrophe, or misfortune. Just leave that up there for a minute because the two words I want you to key in on are anticipates impending danger, catastrophe, or misfortune. We talked about this last week, and anxiety is different from fear. Fear is usually related to a specific threat, while anxiety is more generalized. So the example I used last week is if I go outside of my yard and I come across a snake and I move to get away from that snake, that's a response out of fear. I'm taking a specific action that's related to this threat that's right in front of me. But what tends to happen with fear and what makes anxiety so much more debilitating than fear is that anxiety hangs on where fear lets go. So for example, if I see the snake and I move away from the snake and the snake then slithers away, the further away the snake gets from me, the less fearful I am. Anxiety, on the other hand, is when I stay in the house because I'm afraid there might be a snake out there somewhere. And so one kind of goes away, which is fear. The other tends to hang on. I mean, I can sit in my living room for the rest of my life scared to go outside because I'm afraid there might be a snake. So if you go back to the definition, that's where the word impending comes from. That's why that word anticipates is so important. It's not a specific threat that you see. It's that you're anticipating something that may happen in the future that just as well may not happen. So it's this fear, it's this anxiety that's connected to what I think may or may not happen in the future. So if you're tracking with us, there's an outline at the bottom of your bulletin, and here's the problem that we're all dealing with. It's that most anxiety is rooted in future hypotheticals. Now, before you object to that, let me say that's not true of all anxiety. Had a lot of conversations over the last week. Some anxiety is rooted in the past and what you experienced or maybe what was done to you. And if that's where you find yourself, like, we're going to talk more about that next week and talk about how to let go with some of that and better deal with that. But for today, we're going to talk about how most anxiety, and you know this is true, not all, but most anxiety is rooted in these future hypotheticals, things that may or may not happen that I've somehow convinced myself are going to happen. One writer said it like this: a huge portion of anxiety lives in the future, but is fueled by the past and felt in the present. Proverbs 12:25, Solomon said it like this: anxiety weighs down the heart, but a kind word cheers up. And some of you know exactly what he was talking about. You know what it's like to have a heart that's weighed down by anxiety. You know how it feels not to go somewhere because you're afraid of what might happen if you go. You know how it feels to not be able to sleep because of those intrusive thoughts that keep sprinting through your mind. You know what it's like when your heart rate increases every time your phone notifies you of a text or you get an incoming call because you know it must be bad news. You know how it feels to have your blood pressure spike every time a new bill arrives in the mailbox because you're not sure you can swing it this month. For a lot of us, Solomon's insight about anxiety weighing down your heart is not some hypothetical, but it's an everyday experience. And so the question we want to ask this morning is, what if it wasn't? What if there was something you could do today that would release some of that pressure and relieve some of that weight? So if you have your Bible open to Matthew 6, what you see is part of what's called the Sermon on the Mount. Jesus' sermon starts in Matthew chapter 5, runs all the way through the end of Matthew 7. If you go back and read the whole thing, you'll discover that Jesus talks a lot about things that affect everybody. He talks about anger and lust and revenge and prayer and how to handle your money. And then you get to verse 25 of Matthew 6, and he talks about worry and anxiety. And it's interesting that right after talking about money and how to handle your finances, he immediately launches into this section talking about worry. It's almost as if Jesus understood that one of the things that almost everybody worries about is money. People that don't have money worry about how to get money. People that already have money worry about how to hang on to what they have and get even more money in the future. And so Jesus sees this natural transition from talking about how to handle your treasure to worry in everyday life. And so you get to verse 25, and I just want you to look with me at what he said. Matthew 6:25. Therefore I tell you, do not worry about your life. Just stop there for a minute. Seems kind of simple, doesn't it? Just don't worry. Like let's just say, hey, let's just stop there and say, from this point forward, none of us are going to worry about our lives. Now, you know that doesn't work, because if it did, you would have already done it. Like if it was that simple, all of us would have already done it, and we wouldn't feel like we feel. And yet you keep reading through this passage, you're going to see that 3 different times Jesus says the same thing. Do not worry. And each time it's written in what's called the present imperative, which means this is a command. This is not like a suggestion. This is something he's telling us not to do. And so the implication is that, at least according to Jesus, there are some things we can do that will help us live out this command. There's some things we can do today that will help us overcome our anxiety. And so as you unpack this section, there are 3 kind of big ideas that he teaches that will help us stop worrying so much. So here's the first one, if you're tracking with us. We have to learn to trust God's plan. Matthew 6:25. Therefore I tell you, do not worry about your life, what you will eat or drink, or about your body, what you will wear. Is not life more than food, and the body more than clothes? Look at the birds of the air. They do not sow or reap or store away in barns, and yet your heavenly Father feeds them. Are you not much more valuable than they? Can any one of you, by worrying, add a single hour to your life? Now, during that time, there were 2 things that everybody worried about: where your next meal was coming from and what you were going to wear. And it was a different time. You know that. It's not like you could go to the grocery store. They didn't have groceries like we tend to think about. It wasn't like you could get on Amazon and just, order your next outfit and it would be delivered to your house. They didn't have any of that. And so the 2 things that everybody worried about were, how am I going to feed my family, and what are we going to wear? So it's like Jesus got this huge crowd of people gathered around him, and he says, hey, I know what it is you're worried about. Like, I know what keeps you up at night. You're worried about where your next meal is going to come from and what you're going to wear. And so his encouragement to them, at first, almost sounds a little bit insensitive, because he says, here's what you should do. I know you're worried. Here's what you should do. You should look at the birds. And you think, well, who has time to look at birds, like when you're worried about what you're going to eat and what you're going to wear? His point, though, is that even though the birds don't do any of the things that we do in terms of planning and earning and saving and budgeting and buying, somehow God continually provides what they need. They don't do any of the things that you do, and yet they always have what they need. So make sure you don't misunderstand. Jesus is not saying that you shouldn't save your money and be careful in your spending, but he is saying that we shouldn't sit around worrying about things that are out of our control. One person said, worry is like sitting in a rocking chair. It gives you something to do, but you don't get anywhere. And that's so true. I can sit around all day, and you can too, because some of us are really good at this, and we can worry about all these future hypotheticals, things that may or may not happen, but that doesn't do anything to secure your next meal and help you find clothes. It simply wears you down and causes you even more issues. Now, if Jesus were here today and he were delivering some version of this message, he might not use food and clothing as his primary examples, because those are not necessarily the things that we worry about, but there are some other things he might use. For example, he might say to some of us, hey, don't worry about your 401k. Don't worry about whether or not you're going to be able to retire. Don't worry about whether or not your kid makes the honor roll and gets a spot in the starting lineup. Don't worry about whether or not you're going to lose your job. Don't worry about whether or not your company is going to go bankrupt and shut down. Don't worry about your health. Is not life more than your cholesterol numbers and your resting heart rate and your blood pressure and your BMI? I mean, to be clear, he's not saying that those things are unimportant, but he is very clearly saying that those things are not even close to being the most important. And the problem we have is that we tend to obsess over things as if they were the most important things, when the truth is that there are some things that are much more valuable than the things to which we most often assign the most value. The things that we tend to obsess over as being the most important, what you have to understand, are not normally the most important things. They may not even be like in the top 10 of most important things. And so Jesus, to drive home his point, asks this question, are you not much more valuable than birds? And instinctively, you know the answer is, well, yeah, of course we are. That means if you are, you can trust God's plan. If he's got a plan to take care of birds, which are not as valuable as you are, then he certainly has a plan to take care of you. And so a part of this is just learning to trust God's plan. Now here's the second thing that Jesus talks about. First, I have to trust God's plan, and then I have to seek God's kingdom. Check out what he says in verse 28. And why do you worry about clothes? See how the flowers of the field grow. They do not labor or spin, yet I tell you that not even Solomon in all his splendor was dressed like one of these. If that is how God clothes the grass of the field, which is here today and tomorrow is thrown into the fire, will he not much more clothe you, you of little faith? So do not worry, saying, what shall we eat, or what shall we drink, or what shall we wear? For the pagans run after all these things, and your heavenly Father knows that you need them. But seek first his kingdom and his righteousness, and all these things will be given to you as well. So here Jesus moves. Moves from talking about birds to flowers, but his point is the same. And he says those flowers, as beautiful as they are, almost immediately begin to deteriorate. They begin to turn. Some of you got flowers for Valentine's Day yesterday, and some of them have already started to turn, unless you got them from the Monticello Wayne County florist. But yeah, you're welcome, Danny. Once they're cut, like they start to turn. That's what flowers do. They're here today and they're gone tomorrow. Just like all those other things that we spend our lives chasing after and therefore worry about. Everything that we chase after is here today and gone tomorrow. The money, the cars, the houses, the power, the positions, the possessions, they're all temporary. And as it turns out, those are the same things that everybody else is chasing about, even people who have no concept of who God is and what God offers. That's why Jesus said, even the pagans, even the people who have no concept of God, they run after all those same things that we run after. And here's the thing, everybody spends their life chasing after something. You know that's true. For a lot of people, it's money. For others, it's their career success, it's security, it's approval, it's power, it's peace. If they can't find peace, they'll settle for pleasure. But the point is that everybody's chasing something. Everybody's pursuing something. What's interesting about the way Jesus frames this, though, is that he seems to indicate that what we worry about most frequently tells us what we value and what we're pursuing most intently. I said again, what you worry about most frequently reveals what you're pursuing most intently. So, for example, if you were to do a quick inventory of all the things that you worry about, and you've got your list and I've got my list. If you were to do a quick inventory, the thing that Jesus says is that all those things are closely tied to the things that you're most frequently pursuing. For example, if you worry about money, it's a pretty clear indication that you're pursuing a sense of security that you think is tied to a certain number. If I can just get that number, then I'll feel secure. If you're always worried about your job, it could be that you're chasing success or maybe identity. Maybe you don't know who you would be apart from your job. If you stay up at night worrying about what other people think about you, it could be that you're chasing approval. Like for a lot of us, our anxiety is rooted in whatever it is that we're most devoted to. And so you think about the things you worry about, it'll probably reveal the condition of your heart and what it is that you're most concerned about. And what that means is if I want to worry less, I don't do that by trying harder. Like, that doesn't work. We've all tried that. That doesn't work. But what it does mean is that I can pursue something of greater value than the things I've been pursuing. It means, what's it look like to seek God's kingdom? It means to reorganize my life around a new set of priorities. It means rather than spending all my time worrying about stuff that's here today and gone tomorrow, it means I'm going to pursue the one thing I have available to me that's of eternal value. So the question is, how do I do that? And one of the One of the mantras you often hear in the recovery movement goes like this. It says, if nothing changes, guess what? Nothing changes. What that means in the recovery world is if I don't intentionally take some steps to change my circumstances and my habits and my environment, then it's very unlikely that anything is going to change. And what applies to addiction also applies to anxiety. If I never change anything, if I never reprioritize my life, then I have no right to expect that anything on the back end is going to change. Yet when you look at verse 33, Jesus says there's this promise that's attached to this that's not attached to anything else that you're pursuing. And so we're going to put on the screen, just so you don't miss it. Jesus said this, but seek first his kingdom and his righteousness, and then check out this promise, and all these other things will be given to you as well. What does that mean? It means that everything that I need is available in following him. Now keep in mind, that's not true of anything else that you're pursuing. So for example, if I spend my life seeking security, if I somehow manage to find it, all I get is security. If I spend my life chasing approval, all I get is approval. If I spend my life seeking some sort of peace, if I can ever find it, all I get is peace. And yet Jesus said, if you'll spend your life seeking him, then you have a promise that not only do you get him, but you get all the other things that you need too. And my suspicion is that's a much better deal than what most of us have settled for. Most of us have settled for success, money, and stuff. When Jesus said, I'm offering you something that's greater than all that. And you'll get all that, but even more than that, you'll get me. And in him, you'll find everything you need. And here's the last thing you see in this passage. Jesus says if you want to worry less, you have to focus on today instead of worrying about tomorrow. We should look at verse 34. This is so powerful. Jesus said, therefore, do not worry about tomorrow, for tomorrow will worry about itself. Each day has enough trouble of its own. How true is that? I guess when you read that and you think, yeah, he's right, man. He got that one. So the word for trouble that gets used there in verse 34 is a word in Greek that they use to describe crop damage from a hailstorm. So that culture, like the hailstorms are blowing. Some of you remember the hailstorm that blew through our community last year, this just intense storm. I was out at the park finishing up a t-ball game. All of a sudden, what looked like, just a thunderstorm became this hailstorm, and there was golf ball size hail. It was falling on everybody, and windshields were breaking, and cars were being totaled, and roofs were being damaged. And I mean, it's a miracle that nobody was hurt. But what was so interesting about that storm is that just a few minutes before this, like the sky opened up and all the hail started falling, you didn't think anything about it, right? You thought, well, it's going to rain. It might thunder. You didn't expect the sky to open up and be like a war zone. And nobody expected it to happen, but it came, and we had to deal with the fallout for months. And that's how trouble works. Like sometimes it's a simple summer rain. Other times it's like this, Category 5 hurricane that comes blowing through. It just rips everything apart. But the point is that trying to predict when trouble is going to come and what kind of trouble might come is like trying to predict the weather. Like you just don't know. You know it's going to come. You know it's going to do something, but you don't know how bad it's going to be. You don't know exactly what's going to happen. The problem a lot of us have, though, is that we allow the anticipated potential problems of tomorrow to make us anxious today. What we do. For some people, their anxiety is rooted in what happened yesterday. But for most of us, it's rooted in what we fear may happen tomorrow. One person defined worry as a preoccupation with tomorrow. And that's true. And so Jesus' answer to that is for us to focus on today rather than worrying about tomorrow, while knowing that we have a promise that if trouble comes tomorrow, which it most likely will, He will provide for us whatever it is we need to meet that challenge tomorrow. Now, He's not going to give it to us in advance. Sometimes we wish He would. Like, we think of all these worst case scenarios and we think, well, what would I do? And what would you don't get it in advance, but you get it when you need it. Lamentations 3, the Old Testament says it like this: because of the Lord's great love, we are not consumed, for His compassions never fail. And then check out this: they are new every morning. Great is your faithfulness. I say to myself, the Lord is my portion, therefore I will wait for Him. That was true yesterday. It's been true so far today. And you have a promise from God that it will be true tomorrow. Now, you don't get it in advance. Sometimes I wish you did. But you have a promise that you'll get it when you need it. I want to tell you before we close about the most anxious season of my life, up until this point at least. Like a lot of you, it happened in 2020. So I got a picture I want to show you. This is my two twins. That is Andrew and Jack. That picture was taken back when they were nice. And no, I'm kidding. They're still nice for the most part. Well, one of them is. One of them's not too nice, but that was taken. So they were born on February 24th, 2020. And this is, as I said, this picture was taken. They came very early, and so because they were so early, they had some difficulties breathing and had to stay in the NICU at Central Baptist in Lexington for several days. And they didn't come home until 14 days later, March the 9th, 2020. And during that time, if you were here then, if you came to church here then, you might remember church was doing really well. We were growing and expanding. And so the last Sunday that I preached here was February 23rd. Jamie had been in the hospital for a couple weeks already at that point, and I was going back and forth. I came back and I preached on the 23rd, and the place was packed, and everything was clicking. And it was one of those Sundays that I couldn't wait to get back. There were two things that happened, though, in between the time I left and the time I came back that just complicated everything. The first thing that happened was that when the boys were finally released from the NICU and they came home, both of them had these weird digestive issues that were different. Even though they were twins, they were radically different. And so they were both put on different formulas. And I don't remember who took what, but they were both taking different things. And one of them had to be special ordered from a pharmacy because you couldn't get it at the store. The other one you could find at the store, but the other one you couldn't. And the other thing that happened, the second thing that happened, is that 3 days after we got home, some of you remember this, on March 13th, the world went into lockdown mode because of COVID. Frank and Van and I were sitting in a huddle house. Our phones start going crazy, telling us that all of the basketball tournaments have been canceled and everything's been canceled. And by the end of the day, like, it was a completely different world. Pretty soon, school went virtual. All events were postponed. Nobody can come visit. So now we got these two babies and no grandmas. There's no help. There's nobody coming to rescue us. And church went online only. Remember that? So I've got another picture. Here's a picture of my boys watching me preach. It's a good thing these seats don't recline, or some of you would be in the same position right now. So I come in on Sundays and be me and the worship team and the staff, and I preach to empty seats. And it was like, man, I left one world and I came back to a different one. And it was, I can remember I was so anxious, and maybe you didn't pick this up on the camera, but I'd be trying to turn the pages in my Bible. My hand would be shaking so bad I couldn't turn the pages. Some of you can relate to that. But it wasn't just the church stuff that bothered me. One of the most challenging parts of the COVID stuff you remember it was the supply chain issues. All of a sudden, you couldn't get even basic stuff. Toilet paper was hard to find. Certain food items were hard to find. And that was especially true of baby formula. So all of a sudden, I got two boys, both on specialized formulas, and I can't find either one of them. And I can remember spending hours every day scouring the internet, calling stores, traveling to different places, trying to find what we needed. Thankfully, there were some other people that jumped in and helped along the way and would go out of their way to help when we needed. And the elders were very gracious to give me space and time to do what I needed to do. At that age, some of you remember this, some of you are in this right now, the boys would eat every 3 hours. And they still do. It's amazing. They eat pre-breakfast, breakfast, post-breakfast, and lunch. And that's just every day. But in those days, I remember you open up that little can and you'd be mixing those bottles. And you could see that powder start to go down every day. And every time I mix one of those bottles, I think, boy, gosh, I hope we don't run out. What are we going to do if we can't feed these boys? Where am I going to go? I've been everywhere, can't find it. What if I can't find any more formula and they eat all this and the boys can't eat anything else and they starve to death? I mean, you know how it is. You go through all that stuff in your mind. And I'll be honest with you, with each passing day, I got more and more anxious. Couldn't sleep. My hands were shaking. And I was so worried about what might happen tomorrow that it made me miserable today. Some of you can relate to that. I was asking the same questions that you were asking. What if we all catch COVID and get really sick? What if this is the new normal? We got to wear masks the rest of our lives and kids never go back to school. We can never go back to church. And the question, though, that I was most worried about was the question, how am I going to feed these boys tomorrow if we run out of formula today? And about 6 times a day, I'd ask that question. I'd go to sleep at night, and I'd have that question running through my mind. But here's what I can tell you. It didn't run out. Times I thought we might. Times it got pretty close. But every time one can emptied, there was another can ready to be opened. And so here's what I learned during that, and it's a lesson that I keep having to relearn, and maybe you do too. I spent a lot of today's miserable because I was so worried about what might or might not happen tomorrow. And I bet you've done the same thing. Maybe you do it all the time. Maybe every day when you get up, you got all these questions running through your mind, and you're so worried about what might happen tomorrow that you're missing out on what God has for you today. I've been guilty of that. Maybe you're guilty of it right now. One of my favorite stories in the New Testament takes place. There's these two sisters, Mary and Martha, and they're sisters to Lazarus. And Jesus shows up, and he unexpectedly shows up at their house, and they all go, they're all excited to see him, but Martha realizes, hey, they're here and we need to feed them, so she's going to have this party. So she goes back in the kitchen and she's making all the preparations you make, when somebody comes to your house unexpectedly. And while she's back in the kitchen kind of doing her thing, her sister Mary is sitting out there just talking to Jesus, just kind of listening to Jesus. And Martha's finally had enough. And she goes to Jesus and she says, would you tell my lazy sister to stop talking and get up and do some work? And Jesus looks at her, and I want you to look at what he said. This is in Luke 10:41. Martha, Martha, the Lord answered, you are worried and upset about many things. But few things are needed, or indeed only one. Mary's chosen what is better, and it'll not be taken away from her. Somebody walked in here this morning, that's you. Like if I gave you a piece of paper, you could list, I'm worried about this, I'm upset about this, I'm anxious about it. You got a list of things that you're worried and upset about. And if that's where you find yourself, I want you to know you have a promise straight from Jesus that if you'll just focus on the one thing that's needed, he'll take care of all the details, everything else. Matthew 6:33, Jesus said, but seek first his kingdom and his righteousness, and all these other things will be given to you as well. I want you to stand with me. We're going to sing a couple songs. If you need to pray with somebody, if you're anxious about something and there's something that we can do, we'd be glad to pray with you, be glad to talk with you, be glad to encourage you. If you're here and you've never made a commitment to Jesus, we'd be honored to walk you through that process. There's something you can do today that will change everything about tomorrow, but it starts with him. So if you need to pray with somebody or talk to somebody, we're here.